Theodore Performing Arts Center in Gallipolis, Ohio, where we have Oboes on the Ohio. And today we're going to be talking with Ted Heger, who was my very first oboe teacher, and also the last enrolled student at Curtis with Tabuteau. Hi, Ted.
Hi. Nice to be here and see you again. It's been nearly 20 years, I believe.
Just about.
I like to begin my little talk with a little bit of oboe history. My first teacher was my dad, and so I'm going to start with my dad because his era shows how small the oboe world was in those days, and how his world somehow became connected with Charleston, West Virginia, and Lora, one of Lora's teachers, and so forth. So, my dad entered college in 1925 at the University of Minnesota. He was from St. Paul, and he was an accomplished pianist and sung in a large boys' choir in the Episcopal Church in St. Paul. So he had quite a musical training, but he didn't start the oboe until he was in high school. And there were actually, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, there were actually 3 Paris Conservatory graduate oboe players. Many of the first oboists in this country in the orchestras were from the Paris Conservatory, and they were students of George G. Lay. In the Minneapolis Symphony, there was Alexander Duvoir, who was the first oboe. There was Roger Gautier, who was the English horn player. And then there was another Frenchman who played in the theater, movie theater, Dolce, I believe his name was. And actually, Dolce had played in the Philadelphia Orchestra before Tabuteau came in 1915. And the conductor didn't like his playing, so he came to Minneapolis, played in the movie theaters, and actually the scale of the movie theater in those days was $65 a week, and the scale in the symphony, Minneapolis Symphony, was $35. Of course, the first year people got more money, and so, but actually many of the better musicians preferred to play in the movie theaters because it costs more, it paid more. So anyhow, my dad started taking lessons from Duvoir, and when he entered the university, Duvoir was the teacher because in those days universities didn't have a regular oboe teacher. Usually a local symphony player and so forth would be the teacher. And Dolce, the oboe player in the theater, he died of throat cancer, which is not unusual for many oboe players. And my dad bought his oboe, and he used that oboe for many years. And Lila Storch looked up at the Lora, when she did the history of the Lora factory, she found that fellow's oboe when it was made and so forth. So, my dad was going to be a professional. He took up the oboe and decided to be an oboe professional in the Twin City area because the radio station, WCCO, had an orchestra. The movie house had a large orchestra, and he played extra oboe in the symphony. But then he graduated in 1929. Sound came into the movies. The national hookup, NBC, ABC, and so forth, took place in the radio station, so local stations no longer had orchestras. And so all of a sudden, he was without prospects. But when he was in college, he had a friend who was from a little town in Minnesota, which had a band but no oboe player, and he talked my dad into going up and helping out playing in a concert one weekend. And he had, they played the Paul Venetian dances by Borodin And he had just played that in university, and the conductor of this town band and orchestra was very impressed with my dad, and he said, if you ever want a job, let me know and I'll get you a job up here. And my dad said, yeah, sure, go up to this hick town, you know. Well, of course, the crash at 29, and he actually got the highest paid job in his class, and he went up to Virginia, Minnesota, which is 60 miles north of Duluth, and this man, the conductor, created a music department in the junior college, and my dad's obligation was to play oboe in the band and orchestra and teach music courses, like theory and harmony and so forth. And in those days, and right after the First World War, many communities hired a World War I musician to start a town band. And this fellow up in Virginia had played in World War I band and was sent to Paris, where they had an American band school, which was under, all the teachers were from the Guard Republican Band, which was the famous, kind of like the Marine Band in France. I heard them play once in Philadelphia. Tableau made us go. And he said, this is a representative group, go hear them. So we went there, and he actually knew the old players, of course, because they were older. And they played all orchestral music. They did Afternoon Fawn, Bolero, Suite Francais. It was a very unusual group. Anyhow, he decided, this band director of northern Minnesota, decided to learn all the instruments so that he could teach them. And he already played clarinet and violin, I think. And he had after the war, he had a dance band up in the Canadian-Minnesota border, and somebody in Virginia, and the town was called Virginia, talked him into coming to Virginia and starting a band. And that happened in several communities. It happened in Holland in 1920. The Holland American Legion Band was started and still going today. They just took a tour to Normandy. Centerville, Iowa had a World War I bandsman, Mr. Gower, of Gower Boxman Rubank series. You might have seen that name. And the Boxman was one of his students and so forth. Well, anyhow, eventually the school, he bought, the way he started the band was he bought some of his old pals from Army days, and the city would find jobs for these people. And then he had trunks of music and reeds and instruments that he got from Army surplus, instruments that the Army wanted to get rid of and so forth. So he had the instruments and so forth. And that is actually, when I was in West Virginia, some of the band director in Lincoln County, which didn't have too much money, used to go to the quartermaster annual sale or something and got a lot of his instruments very inexpensively for the school system.
They're still doing it.
They're
still doing it.
Anyhow, he got some very interesting instruments. He had an E-flat flute, which is very unusual. That was one of his instruments. Okay, so anyhow, eventually it went into the school system, and many famous musicians came out of that area. Sherman Walt, the principal of bassoon in Boston for many years, was from there. And a horn player in the LA Philharmonic was from there. And so forth. My dad stayed there for 16 years, and in the little town, this is the Charleston connection, in a little town 5 miles away called Eveleth, these were iron ore mining towns, And the city had a lot of money, but the people didn't have that much money, but the city was quite well-to-do. The schools were very advanced and so forth. We even had a swimming pool in the 1920s in the high school. And when I went to high school, we had to go to the Y and freeze our can off in the wintertime, going back and forth. Anyhow, oh yes, and then this little town next to Virginia, they hired an Italian bandmaster, and his son, Mr. Moroni, became an oboe player in the Charleston Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
And he and my dad used to play together in the Duluth Symphony, and Mr. Moroni was kind of he played other woodwind instruments too, but he kind of concentrated on the oboe because, and anyhow, during the war, Second World War, when a lot of musicians were drafted, he played second oboe in the Minneapolis Symphony with Ancelucci. And eventually, around 1950, many community orchestras decided to go semi-pro, and so they advertised an international musician for retired symphony musicians. We will find you positions in industry or schools if you will come and play in our symphony. So in Charleston there was Mr. Moroni, and there was Mr. Nellen, who played bassoon, and Mr. Lambrose, who was a concertmaster, and they all had positions. Moroni taught in the junior high. Nellen had a job with Union Carbide, I think, and Lambrose taught at Morris Harvey College. And so they had there some of the top people to make it kind of semi-professional and so forth. So that's one connection was Mr. Moroni coming to spend his last part of his life in Charleston.
And that's how we met. I grew up in Charleston, and the connection, your dad had a great radio connection with his start in music, and mine was sort of influenced by the radio too, but not quite so grandiose. I heard a pop song with an oboe in it. And I said, I love that sound. I want to play that. And I went and scrounged up an instrument and started playing it. So one of the other parents who was already taking his son to lessons down at Marshall, where you were, scooped me up and took me down and deposited me at your doorstep for lessons, which was a great thing.
Yeah. When I was, so I studied with my dad primarily until the summer of 1950. When I was 16, I went to Transylvania Music Camp, which was in Brevard, North Carolina, and John Mack was the oboe teacher, and I was playing in the Ann Arbor Civic Orchestra besides the high school orchestra, and Dr. Maddie, who's the founder of Interlochen Music Camp, was the conductor, because that was part of his university duties, was to conduct the Ann Arbor Civic Orchestra. And so at the end of the season, they always gave a high school student a scholarship to Interlochen, and he's made a big announcement. Our oboe player, Ted Heger, is being offered this year's scholarship to Interlochen. And at that time, it cost $300 for a whole summer, and they gave a scholarship of $150. And I said, I'm sorry, I have a scholarship to another music camp. And that was just, there's another music camp? Anyhow, Brevard, the advantage there were some people in Ann Arbor who taught down there, and so they tried to get me to go there because they didn't have many students. And at that time, Interlochen was on the unfair list, blacklist of the union. Petrola put them on the blacklist because of their broadcasts. And people playing these broadcasts, music from Interlochen, they weren't members of the union. Mm-hmm. So they could no longer hire union musicians to teach up there. And so before, when their first teacher up there was Andro, who was an oboist in the Cincinnati Symphony. And then he had he couldn't teach there anymore because he was, of course, in the union. So they hired, I don't know, somebody from the college or something to teach. Whereas Brevard, I could study with John Mack, who was a Curtis student at that time, and I could play in the orchestra, and it was small. They only had 3 students, whereas Interlochen had tons of students, and there were like 10 oboes in each group or something. So I knew I could get a lot more individual attention at Brevard. So I went to Brevard and studied with John Mack, and he kind of introduced me to the Tabuteau stuff, or what to expect, or so forth. Mostly studied in the Barrett book, the articulation exercises. Did a lot with that. And at that time, most universities did not have did not have an oboe teacher. University of Michigan, which now has like 500 oboe students or something, at that time only had one student who actually became a very famous oboist, Grover Schiltz, who played many years in the Chicago Symphony. He got his degree from Michigan, and they hired a player from the Detroit Symphony, Mr. Wardrop, to come up once a week and give lessons to oboe players. And they did not have a oboe teacher until about 1955, when Florian Mueller left Chicago and was hired to be a full-time oboe teacher at the University of Michigan. And after I left Curtis and in the Marine Band, I was the oboe teacher at University of Iowa, and I didn't have any degrees at all.
And what year was that? Roughly.
58.
So in 1958, you didn't have a degree, but they hired you at the University of Iowa.
I was an undergraduate assistant, and it took me 6 years to get a degree because I was only allowed to take 8 hours of courses because my load was pretty heavy. I had to play in wooden quintet, faculty wooden quintet, the orchestra, which was quite active. I think it was three rehearsals a week, and then I had quite a few students, and they had a summer camp in the summer, so I had a lot of those students. So it was a pretty busy load actually, but it was a wonderful experience because we played big time stuff in the orchestra and learned a lot of the woodwind literature list. So they didn't hire and then there were 2, after I had that job for 6 years, and then I got my bachelor's degree, then I stayed on another year to get my master's, and then I went to Marshall, and I was 65. And they didn't have a full-time oboe teacher at University of Iowa until the upper 60s, I believe.
Well, I think it was about 68 when I came to study with you.
Yeah, and I think that's when they first started, when they first had because I went back to get a 30 hours or a MFA, Masters of Fine Arts, and I think it took me 4 summers, of course, and I think the last 2 summers is when they had a full-time oboe teacher.
Well, so it's interesting because this project we're doing was kind of sparked by you mentioning you were the last at Curtis to study with Tabuteau, and I thought, how fortunate am I? I'm kind of a grand student having studied with you, and my other major teacher, Bill Baker, had studied with John Mack, who was a student of, so I thought, well, I'm a grand student and a great-grand student, and you also have double duty because you were a student of Tabuteau and also a student of John Mack.
And I believe, oh yes, my dad, the other student of Beauvoir was Robert Mayer, who was he played in the Chicago Symphony for many years and was known primarily as a great teacher. And I believe Mr. Baker took some lessons from Mr. Mayer, because Bob Mayer's grandson came to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp at one time. He lived in Worthington, I think.
Yes, he studied with Bill Baker, and interesting, I
Yeah.
had Bob's English horn for a while. I bought it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well, anyhow,
that
yeah.
passed through my
He
hands.
says, I'm grandson of Mayer. His last name wasn't Mayer, but he was Mayer's daughter's son.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was a student one summer there, and then he came back later as a counselor, oboe counselor. And anyhow, he said that Mr. Baker had studied with his grandfather.
Now, how did you end up getting to Curtis and studying with Teddy?
Okay, I graduated in '51, and I decided to go audition for Curtis because Ann Arbor we moved to Ann Arbor when I was in 7th grade, and my dad got a position at the University of Michigan teaching music literature and history, and he was still my oboe teacher because the university didn't have a teacher. And let's see what I can say. Oh, okay, I graduated high school in '51 and decided to try out for Curtis. They had, like everybody had auditions in April or something like that. And
But what made you decide that? Your dad talked
Well,
to you, or other people talked to you, or?
Well, I started with my dad, and then Ann Arbor had a wonderful concert course in which they had like maybe 10 visiting orchestras every year on their concert course. So I heard all these wonderful oboe players, most of whom at that time were students at Tableau, like the Boston Symphony, at Gomberg, and well, let's see, Cleveland had Mark Lifshey, and later John Mack, and so most of the orchestras, I said, wow. And then the Philadelphia Orchestra came for a May festival in which they gave 6 concerts in 4 days, so they were kind of residents for a week. And we got to hear some of the rehearsals, and of course Tabuteau was still playing, and then Delancey was the associate first, and he played. Said, gee, if I took lessons from Tabuteau, I could sound like that.
So you were kind of captured by his sound and his playing.
Yeah. And Tabuteau put on a great show. He looked like everybody's great Santa Claus or something. He just around and smiling and everything, kind of showing off when he played. Gee, what a nice man, you know. Well, no. He was just putting on a show.
Good actor, huh?
So he said, well, if you want to sound, you know, if you want to be a big time oboe player, the place to go to then was Curtis.
Did you talk to him when he was there that week? Did you try to approach him, or?
No. I talked to Delancey and Minsker. That's another interesting story. Minsker was the English horn player, and one reason I got the job at Marshall was because the dean or the chairman of the music department was a high school buddy of John Minsker, who was from West Virginia. And actually Minsker was there was a national orchestra at that time, National Youth Orchestra pre-Interlochen, which was conducted by Joseph Maddie. And John Minsker was a concertmaster, so he played violin before he took up oboe. And the chairman played flute, and so he knew Minsker, so he said, oh, well, you're a student at Tableau. You knew all about Tableau, so that was
enough.
favorite. And the next thing was that the dean of the Teachers College had been an ex-Marine, and I'd been in a Marine band, and says, oh, fellow Marine, gun-ho, you know. So I had it in, man. Good. Oh, it's lucky because I was just in that period when you could get tenure without having a doctorate. I was one of the last ones, and but I had to get 30 hours beyond the master's, so I went back in the summers in the 60s. And in 71 I got I got my MFA, they call it 30 hours beyond the master's. And but I didn't go now, and I figured, oh man, the amount of money to get a doctorate and all that was really worth it, you know.
To get the job.
I didn't make full professor because I didn't have doctorate, but you know, who cares? Let's see. So now Curtis was very interesting. When I went there, they seemed to be, it was run by, the chairman of the Curtis at that time was Ephraim Zimbalist Sr., who was married to Mrs. Curtis Bach Zimbalist. And Mrs. Curtis was from the Curtis Publishing Company, and she was a patron of the arts, and in 1926 she founded the Curtis Institute of Music, which had free tuition for anybody who'd make the audition. They kept it small, like one person per year, so they only, like an oboe, they had 3 or 4 oboes, but they only took in one each year.
So one would cycle out and they'd bring another one in.
So
he only had to teach 4 lessons.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
And then he had
pretty good workload.
Yeah, and then he had the woodwind class, and he had string class too.
And what was the woodwind class like?
That was oh gee, it was bad not being bawled out in a private lesson, but when you're bawled out in front of your colleagues, it was. Well, in the first class, beginner class or first year class, it was like, well, both classes, it was like a double woodwind quintet, and so you took turns. So there were 2 oboes and 2 clarinets and so forth. Mm-hmm. And all we did for 3 years I was there or whatever was the introduction to the Beethoven Quintet and the beginning of the Gounod Symphony.
The beginning?
Yeah, beginning of it. And that's as much as we ever, a little bit of Lefebvre.
The quintet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First page.
First page.
And it's all.
It's a good page. It's a good page.
And then.
So was that because they were trying to perfect it, or because you didn't have that many classes?
Well, when I was there, I don't know if it was because Zimbalist decided to make it a soloist training school and just emphasize the violin and pianists and so forth, and not and kind of left the orchestra, because we only had orchestra rehearsal 1 night a week when I was there, which was 2 hours on Thursday night, and for supposedly an orchestral training school, I mean, any college has more rehearsals than that, you know. And we had one lesson a week, and theory or solfege, you call it, was only once a week. Music history was only once a week, which was music appreciation. She read the back of record jackets. And we had to memorize it, you know. But she was a Curtis family member. Nice lady. But that was it.
Huh.
So as long as you made progress, I guess, in your lessons, you stayed there. And now they got, the orchestra gives concerts, they go on world tours, they have outreach programs, and they go teach in some neighborhoods and so forth. And they have many more courses, more like a college course.
Well, in the beginning, it was like more like the French Conservatory, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we taught on Monday. With the last semester I was there, he was gonna retire in January. And so to make up his year contract, he gave 2 lessons a week, Monday and Wednesday, and that was, and then Delancey took over next semester. I met a old player from the Utah Symphony who actually was a student at Curtis when he was the last of Delancey's student and then the first of Woodham's, the guy who's there now. And I was in the tradition of Tabuteau and Delancey, and he was in the tradition of Delancey and Woodham's. And his daughter was going to school at Hope College, and she was a composition major, and he was going to play oboe on her composition.
Wow.
And I noticed he had beautiful teeth. Really.
Well, what were lessons like? What were lessons like with him?
Well,
What was your first
okay,
lesson like? Do you remember that?
Okay, when I first went, I was not accepted to Curtis.
So you,
I decided,
you didn't get in the first
there were
time?
only four students that tried out to show how small the oboe world was. It was Bob Humiston, who became eventually oboist in the Kalamazoo Symphony and taught at Western Michigan University. He went to Oberlin. And so he studied with Mr. Zupnik, who was an oboist in the Cleveland Orchestra, and his daughter played in the Minnesota Orchestra, Marilyn Zupnik. Anyhow, and then another guy tried out. There were 2 identical twin brothers. One played French horn and one played oboe, and for some reason they didn't accept. I don't know if they had to take both of them, or they took one and not the other, so they didn't come, that type of thing. He also had a wire on his reading tab. So, get that thing off there, He didn't like
wires.
But they ended up going, I forgot their name, they ended up going to the New England Conservatory, and they made their career in the Buffalo Symphony. He was first oboe and he was first horn. So,
Not too bad.
and so at this time the draft was still on, the Korean War and so forth. And so he was losing a lot of students at Curtis because of the draft. And so he decided to take this 16-year-old boy, who was from Cambridge, Ohio, I believe. And he stayed 1 year and then decided he couldn't afford it. His parents decided he couldn't afford to go there.
But I thought all the ways were paid. You got accepted.
Well, it was a living expense.
Because in Philadelphia.
I think he lives in Cambridge, Ohio, and became an engineer or something, but he was originally from Youngstown, Ohio. And so they took him, and he was 16 years old, and so I decided to take private lessons. And so wrote a letter, and he said, yes, I still have it. His wife wrote, accepting me as a student. And he said, $10 for a half hour, $15 for 45 minutes. I said, well, I can only afford $10. And, well, he was very generous with his time. You'd stay there longer than you wanted to. You could stay there all morning. He'd be making reeds and stuff like that, and you were there all morning. He was very generous. He was not, stingy about. There used to be a clarinet player, teacher at Michigan from Detroit, who used to set his alarm clock at the beginning of the lesson, and when it rang, time's up. But Tabuteau was not. He was not very generous. He usually came in, taught on Saturday morning, Saturday was his big reed day. He started making reeds while he played, and he yelled at you and stuff like that. He started out with a lot of long tones, and then the Barrett book, start from the beginning. I've already been through the Barrett books a couple of times, but he started over again. with him.
Was it
for the 40
radically different when you did that than what you'd already studied? Or did it drive you nuts because you'd already done it and you were young and
No, because it was, those are still hard to play, right, musically. But anyhow, he made you, like with typical the conservatory, made you transpose. So one week you would take it and play it in one key, and no, you played the original key. Next week in a different key, and then he would say, "Now play it in the original key," and he could tell whether you practiced or not, because if you practice, really knew it in one key, you could go back. Well, I had done that with my dad. He made me transpose all the studies and Barrett studies, and so as bad as he thought I played, he was amazed that I could transpose so well.
I was amazed. You used to do that in my lessons with you. You used to say, "Oh look, let's play this a half step up. Oh look, let's try this a minor third down. Okay, we'll play this one up over."
Yeah,
I was still struggling to play the original key.
Freudian studies, and let's see, we had the Barrett studies, and then we had the Broad studies, advanced, I think it's 20 A2s or something like that. And I liked the Broad, and I never taught much out of the Barrett studies, because there's one other oboist around here said, I really got tired of them. And I actually enjoyed the Broad studies as well. They were quite musical. Andre Broad was a very interesting oboe character. He was a Paris Conservatory teacher back in the early 1830s or so. And he invented the shaper, and he invented the half hole. He improved the gouging stuff, and he died in his 30s, and he could speak fluent Chinese.
Huh.
So he must have been really quite a character. Anyhow, I enjoyed the Broad studies, and used those a lot in my teaching. And of course the Rubank book, because Boxman was...
And West Virginia loved the Rubank books.
Oh yeah, well...
They pulled those out for everything.
I got tired of them too. But
every contest you had to play out of that book.
Yeah, yeah. So my first lesson, okay, Lou Rosenblatt was still around, and Curtis. He became a famous English horn player in Philadelphia later. He was making reeds in the corner, and Tabuteau asked me, the first thing he asked me was, "Play chromatique." I said, sir, "Excuse me, sir, chromatique." And he says, "He means a chromatic scale." Okay? So that's what I remember from my first lesson. And then at the end of the that first semester, Rosenblatt decided to join the, now it's the Army Field Band, but then it was the Ground Forces Band, and he decided to join the Ground Forces Band. So there was an opening at Curtis. And at that time, like a lot of schools, the school was run by Mr. Zimbalist, the president, and the secretary. Now they have, chairman of this, dean of that, just like, universities. When I went to Marshall, there was a president and a provost and a few deans and chairmen, and that was it. Now they have associate deans, associate chairmen, assistant deans, this administration, even though they don't have that many more students, like at Curtis, they have so much administration. Also, what's changed at Curtis now is that they have dorms, because dormitory in the school, because it's too dangerous for students to live in the city anymore. and rehearsals late at night and so forth, you know. And when I was at Curtis, we got most of our experience by playing in outside groups, because Curtis only had, say, one rehearsal a week, and it was usually conducted by the assistant conductor of the Philly Orchestra, and they were trying out, kind of rehearsing the music that they had to conduct the orchestra and give it a try out. And so most of the time I was at Curtis, we only had about 3 students, and the famous players there, I was not one of their famous graduates, but their famous players when I was there was Felix Krauss, who played in the Cleveland Orchestra of English horn many years, and let's see, Alfred Genovese, who played in the Met and ended up in the Boston Symphony. And before my time, there was John Mack, of course, and Louis Rosenblatt, and Larry Thorsenberg, and so forth. So it was quite a small group. And anyhow, there were some community orchestras. There was a symphony, what we called a symphony club in Philadelphia, which had a chamber orchestra on Tuesday night and a large orchestra on Thursday night, and we played in that. And if you were from Curtis or so forth, you got to play in it. And a lot of Curtis kids played in that. And they read different music. They never gave a concert. They read different music every week. And it was sponsored by Mr. Fleischer of the Fleischer Collection.
Oh.
And they carried him, he was very old then, and they carried him up to every week. His chauffeur or whatever carried him up to the balcony so he could listen to the rehearsal. And one night, at the end of the year, he would give a dinner for the orchestra. And he had all this music because during the Depression, they got a lot of money from the WPA to give to composers to write music, and there was even an old violinist in the orchestra who had made his living during that time being a copier, because he didn't have printers or whatever, and all he did was copy music. Back when I went into the Marine Band, they had copiers, copy music. They didn't have, you know. So,
were there any famous pieces that came out of that WPA time that you remember?
No.
Compositions?
I don't remember playing any. He usually played something like Haydn or Mozart in the chamber music. Chamber rehearsal, they played usually a Haydn or Mozart symphony read through, and then he would do some manuscript music. So you're always reading, and never gave a concert or anything. They hired the conductor, and they just read through stuff every week. And we played in that, and then one of the suburbs had an orchestra. We went and played in that. And then they had a shortage of oboe players in those days, so we got to play in a lot of the community orchestras that didn't have an oboe, you know, and would hire us.
So there were paid jobs.
Trenton, New Jersey.
There were paid jobs then.
Yeah, and I got to play one of the opera company things, in which the other 2 oboes were John Minsker and Louis de Fulvio, who was the second oboe player in the orchestra, and I got to play second oboe.
I got to play second oboe to you in the Lilliput Opera Orchestra. Do you remember that? In Charleston?
Oh, yeah.
Years ago. But I digress. So you would go to a lesson with Tabuteau, and he would yell at you. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, he did mostly what I remember. I mean, his number system, I think, was mostly phrasing. So you, instead of going, seeing the big crescendo, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you connected notes and went 1, 1, 2, 2, 3. So you kind of graduate the volume or the intensity. And then he did a lot with connecting notes. So if you had a large interval, you say, you don't see a boxer hit like this. No, he prepares and connects. So that's how you get ready for a, like that. And he did, of course, a lot like a lot of teachers in those days. He did a lot of imitation. He would play something and then you play it like this. And no, like this. And then you try to imitate. But he had eyes that could look right through you, just make you feel miserable. But anyhow, after playing with him, it was easy to play with a lot of mean conductors for a while. Like the conductor of the Marine Band was quite tough, a real disciplinarian and so forth. And after I was at Curtis for a while, then I went auditioned for the Marine Band in Washington, D.C., and I had auditioned for the West Point Band, but they decided they didn't have an opening, or the oboists decided to stay there, and the oboe player happened to be a son of first oboe in the NBC Symphony. And he later went into the Marine Band, but anyhow, so I saw John Mack on the street, because John Mack, Tabuteau was still around, and John Mack came to visit him and so forth, and sometimes play extra in the orchestra. And he was on the I saw him on the street, and of course I knew him from high school when I studied with him. And he said, "Oh, I have a friend that's in the Marine Band from Juilliard," because John Mack had graduated from Juilliard before he went to Curtis. And he said, "I have a friend from Juilliard who plays trumpet in the Marine Band. I think they have an opening. Why don't you give him a call?" So I called and he said, "Yeah, we have an opening for oboe." So I went to D.C. and it was mostly orchestral music. I had to play a tuba on and some other, or it was no band music as such. So the conductor, Mr. Saddleman at that time, said, "Well, we have musicians from all over the country, who are auditioning to come in this wonderful band, and well, we'll let you know, I thought, well, okay. Went home. It was after Curtis was over for the year, and I went home to Ann Arbor. And then one day I got a phone call and said, "This is Sergeant so-and-so from the recruiting office in Ann Arbor, and I understand you're going to join the Sousa's band." It says, "Okay, report at in Detroit for your physical," and so forth. And so I took my physical, and they took me with a bunch of other regular Marines who were headed for Paris Island. And I said, "Oh, please, I hope the train stops in D.C. so I don't have to go there." Oh, I have to tell you another small world Minneapolis story. Before Dubois came, they actually had a very famous oboist in the Minneapolis Symphony. Minneapolis Symphony started in 1903, and in 1912, their first oboe was Bruno Labate. He was a famous oboe player in the New York Philharmonic, and he was offered the job in the New York Philharmonic, and Minneapolis loved him so much that they offered to buy him a house if he would stay, a new house. but no, it was too much of an opportunity, so he left. But there was my dad had a history of the first 50 years of the Minneapolis Symphony. It has a picture of the first chair of people in the early orchestra, and has Bruno Labate, who Tabuteau said was the most talented oboe player who ever lived, but he didn't have my training.
Interesting.
Yeah, and my dad had some recordings of him, and he was a wonderful player in many ways, a very very musical and so forth. There were funny stories about him, like John Mack started taking lessons from him, and something happened to the body's oboe, and said, "I took all the keys off, and it still doesn't work." and he didn't know much about reeds, and he could play on anybody's reed or something, that type of thing. Anyhow, he was quite a wonderful player.
Well, in your lessons, okay. So how did the issue of reeds go down when you were taking your lessons with Tabuteau?
Well, like a lot of apprentice student type thing, Tabuteau's opinion in a lot of people in those days was, well, why should I tell you in 5 minutes what took me 40 years to learn? So he would never show anything about music, about reeds. He would learn about reeds from other players, and of course he gave me a reed when one of my first lessons. He gave me a reed. He said, "It's not very good. Here." Okay, but it was a beautiful looking reed.
Is that the one you still have?
Yeah.
It plays beautifully, still to this day. I tried it this morning.
And anyhow, Rosenblatt had joined the Army band, and so there was an opening at Curtis, and he says, "See the secretary," and go to Curtis and see the secretary. So I got him Curtis in.
So you didn't discuss like thicknesses of the gouge and wrap it this way and scrape it this way. You just were supposed to imitate. So it's kind of sink or swim.
Yeah, I didn't know.
How was your reed? Did you change your reed making then? Because your father used a French scrape, correct?
Yeah. Later, when things were changing a little bit, and a lot of the Tableau students were playing in the orchestras now, and so the reed style, of course, was changing. So I think at the end, my dad got something sort of in between,
Mm-hmm.
The cane, I remember the cane was the French cane that he got was very thin, because you didn't have to scrape the back very much, you scraped the tip of the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to get a thicker gouge, of course, when you did the back. And John Mack would let me try his reeds once. They were wonderful. But he wouldn't. He said, if Tabuteau found out I told you anything about reeds, he would be really mad. So he didn't tell me anything either.
Oh, jeez.
And but I got to look at him, the half moon thing
Mm-hmm.
and all that, and the spine going up the middle and all that. My reeds were never as perfected as some, but anyhow, and I had to change them quite a bit when I was at Iowa. I got, that's another part of my life. When I got out of the band.
The Marine Band.
Yeah. I took an audition in New York, because the flute teacher at University of Iowa came from New York, and she was at her parents' apartment for a visit. So I said, well, you can come to New York and come to this apartment on Fifth Avenue or whatever, and play for me, So I just had to play some of the Hindemith Quintet. And what was I going to say about it? Anyhow, I didn't have any college work at all. And says, well, you were at Curtis and you've been in the Marine Band and so forth. We'll let you come to Iowa. So I had to start as a freshman, and some of my students had to help me with some of my courses, because they were more upperclassmen, even though they were younger than ours. anyhow, I hadn't been in school for so many years that had to
How old
catch up
were
on
you
my-
then?
25, I think. Yeah, I think it was 25. Yeah, 25. And my wife had a master's degree, and I was a freshman, and she had a master's, and she was hired to teach harp and theory for part-time, and take some courses and so forth. And I had started as a freshman. I didn't have to take freshman English because I took that at the University of Maryland. Courses then were $30 a semester, and the Marine Corps paid paid, oh gosh. They paid, you only had to end up paying like $10 or something because the Marine Corps would pay
The rest of it?
the rest of it. And Bowling Green.
And you were still in the service, or that was after?
Yeah, I was still in tour. So I went on one night a week and took this freshman English course, which was offered at Bowling Air Force Base, which is where the Air Force Band was, and it was near the Marine Barracks, so I took that course, and that was the only course I took. So I didn't have to take freshman English, and I didn't have to take phys ed, because I've been in the
Been the Marine Corps?
Yeah, because I been in the service, and also, once you're past 25, you don't have to take a phys ed. So the other one was the only things I didn't have to take. So it was a long time, but it was a nice experience. But anyhow, the teacher before me was this Robert Humiston, who had tried out for course and had been a student of my dad's and taught at Western for many years. And he stayed on and got his finished his doctorate, and then, but he was a teacher, and before him was William Gower, who was the son of Mr. Gower of Rubank's fame. And then there were a guy by the name of Greg Stanke, who was you see him, he wrote a lot of compositions and stuff. And he taught over for a couple of years, and then there was a woman from Juilliard who taught a couple of years. So it wasn't until the late '60s that they finally had a full-time teacher at Iowa. And now, of course, every school's got an old teacher practically. And when I read the Double Reed Journal now, not only do I not know the students, of course, but I don't even know their teachers anymore. There's just a few left, of the ones that I know anything about. And on TV, orchestras don't seem to tour like they used to.
It's expensive.
And so, yeah, and of course, Ann Arbor had all these visiting orchestras all the time. And now, see, on TV, occasionally you see the New York Philharmonic. And then once I saw the San Francisco Symphony.
Live?
And I love their oboe player. He's the one that died of a stroke recently.
Bill?
I forgot what his name was, but he's only in his 50s, and he finished with something like the Strauss Concerto, and then collapsed with this stroke or something and passed away. And I liked his playing a lot. I like the woman who plays in the New York Philharmonic.
Yes.
She's from I like her playing a lot. And let's see, what other, L.A. Philharmonic, I think, has been on. There's a woman there. So I don't get to hear, too many. And a lot of the former community orchestras are now professional orchestras, so every town's got their own, own orchestra, and they don't have to have.
Yeah, well, we do. As we have our own orchestra, and you were there on our very first concert of the Ohio Valley Symphony.
Oh, yeah?
Helping out, yes.
Yeah.
You and Avis both came and played.
That's right.
and helped us get our orchestra
I
started.
remember once the New York Philharmonic came to Charleston Municipal Auditorium, and he didn't have air conditioning, and it was one of those really hot nights, and the orchestra was wearing T-shirts. So there was Harold Gomber with a T-shirt on, playing Bartok Concerto Orchestra. I think he played in that, and then his associate first played the other stuff.
It was probably all guys at that time.
Yeah, that's changed in the service bands too. Not only was the band all male, but even the drill team and the drum and bugle corps, which was stationed there, were all men, no blacks, no all white.
Things have changed. I do remember hearing the Cleveland Orchestra the first time when I was very young, and I remember looking on the stage to see how many purses, because you could see through the feet. There were only a handful of purses, only a couple of women in the orchestra. Things are changing. It's getting better.
Oh yeah, and there was a good guy named Goldberg who played first flute in Pittsburgh for 100 years. I think Wendell studied with him.
Yes, I think he did.
And
Wendell
wouldn't
Dobbs.
allow any women. All his whole career, just men in the flute section, which is unusual.
Yeah,
The
well,
flute, you know.
Storch mentions about when she was trying to get in, that he didn't want to have any women, Tabuteau did not want to have any women study with him.
Right.
And there were also some references
It was only because it was during the war and he couldn't get men that he let in, I think there were 3 women. One was I forget her maiden name, but Mrs. Alfie, and the only reason I know about her is because she lived in Detroit for a long time, and she used to send students to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp at the time.
more circles, completed circles.
And now she lives in Florida, I believe, and then there's somebody else, McCartney or something. Anyhow, one of them played in Buffalo for a while, I think. Anyhow, she went back for she's about 90 something now. She went back for the last celebration or anniversary occurs, I think it's 75th anniversary or something. And she mainly went back because those 2 ladies that she was in school with decided to come back too. So she wanted to see them once more.
And you were the last enrolled student at Curtis with Tabuteau, I believe, right?
Well, yeah, there were, the youngest one was Richard Cantor, who played in the Chicago Symphony for many years. And he came, in my last year, he was like a freshman, and he only had Tabuteau for a semester because Tabuteau retired in January of '54. He retired and then Delancey took over. So actually the last one, I guess, to be admitted was Dick Cantor, who's also a student of Robert Mayer. Robert Mayer. Anybody in Chicago has studied with Robert
Mayer. Yeah.
There have been, in the woodwind world, well, any world, there have been some famous teachers who weren't always the principal player. There was a bassoon teacher in New York who played in the New York Philharmonic for 42 years, and before that, Chicago, and before that, Minneapolis, Philadelphia. He played all his life in the big orchestras. His name is Simon Kovar, and he was always like the assistant first or something. He was never the principal. But he was, if you wanted a job in the bassoon world, you had to take some lessons from Simon Kovar.
Because he was it.
And in the Chicago area, if you wanted to do anything in the Oboe, you had to study with Robert Mayer. And actually, 3 or 4 of his students actually played in the symphony. There was Dick Cantor, who played second oboe for many years, and there was Grover Schultz, who played English horn for many years. Jerry Sruchek, who played second oboe and then went to Indiana to teach oboe there for many years. And then there was a guy by the name of William Stocking, who played oboe and then became the personnel manager. So he had,
Do
I
you,
guess now is, Richard Canner, I think, is the last one of the mayor's students to play in Chicago.
do you think, what do you think might be some of the biggest influences that Tabuteau had on you? And likewise, some of the biggest influences other teachers had on you?
I think partly the sound, it was such, going to listen to him at concerts and hearing him, I always went early to hear him warm up because, oboe players
Yeah.
warm up early. And listen to him, he had the whole stage. There was some timid violin player who'd wear a mute so he wouldn't bother Tabuteau. They would practice in the back. But Tabuteau's always, put on this big show before trying his reeds and stuff. So he got this, and then he would, besides hearing him play all these concerts, he'd always play at lessons all the time, and playing something the way he wanted you to play it. So he had this, I think the biggest thing was the sound he had in his mind. I hear in my mind, I could hear I can still see in my mind and hear him warming up. So I think just the sound, hearing the sound.
Do you think any of his recordings came even close
I
to
think
representing?
the one on that he played the double concerto with,
Uh-huh.
I thought that was the best. There was one, the first chair, when he played the Handel's concerto. Yeah, it was Handel, or Mozart. Handel concerto.
And what would you say was missing? So, because the rest of us didn't get to hear him live, you've got it, as you said, you've got that sound in your ear. So, what's missing when you hear a recording? Is it even possible to describe what's missing?
Well, I remember my dad's reaction. He says, Tabuteau is such a good, most famous oboe player in the country, but I was never impressed in recordings on his playing. There's other oboe players he sounded better. Well, it sounded like Robert Bloom had this lush vibrato and stuff, and it sounded great on recordings, And Tabuteau, even some of Bruno Labbatte's playing, he wasn't considered near Tabuteau, but in a way, on recordings, he sounds great. I don't think it got his sound, and he didn't have this lushy vibrato. That it was part of his sound. It was very alive, but it wasn't the like Robert Bloom type, who was a student of Tabuteau. The Robert Bloom type vibrato.
A more subtle vibrato?
It's just kind of a part of, he used to talk about the ring of the sound or something, the speed of the sound or something that was kind of, the vibrato was kind of part of his sound, but it was never, you never heard it very much, especially in recordings. I don't think his sound came out as well, except for that Prague festival, that recording with him playing Mozart, and the Bach double. I think probably the Bach double came the closest to. I had one of my last students here she was wanted to play that with a friend of hers. Play the second movement for contest, I said, oh man. So I said, okay, I want to play this Tableau recording for you. And I had a kind of a cheapy machine that could play anything. And it didn't sound very good. I said, I was so embarrassed because I remember it as being so great, but that machine didn't do it any favors. So I still have a recording of the Bach double. I think that's probably the closest to the second movement. Parts of the Handel concerto sound like him. I think just the advancement of recording equipment too, you know.
Well, I think it's difficult to capture the oboe sound on recordings.
Yeah, I was always terrible. I mean, just embarrassing sometimes. So, do I sound that bad? Jeez, but
So do you think, what was your favorite live performance of his?
well, the what's that piece? It's a French piece that has a big it skulls. I remember him playing that. That was wonderful. I said, I enjoyed your concerto, sir. He said, thank you very much. And then he did play the Mozart. There was an arrangement of the Mozart oboe quartet with string orchestra.
Yeah, I was reading about that, yeah.
And that was that was funny because well, we always went. I usually went to the matinee because that was a little cheaper than Saturday night concert. You could go to a concert for 75 cents.
Wow.
If you sat up in the balcony. So I usually went to the matinee on Friday afternoon, and so he got up in front, and Ormley was ready to start, and he started playing before Ormley brought in the he said, oh, excuse me. You know. So,
Did he start again?
yeah, and so he had to start twice. Then
Maybe he was just messing with Ormond.
I don't know. It was kind of funny. They kind of laughed at all that stuff. Let's see. I heard him do the Brahms with Zimbalist. Came back and played the Brahms violin concerto. So Tabuteau played the solo.
Yeah.
And it was something, of course. Oh, I love the way Delancey played it too. Mostly I remember his skulls. That's all. It's a big solo.
What was your favorite solo to play?
Gosh. Well, I actually played that once in Davenport, Iowa. They had a good orchestra then, and that was fun. I was in my prime or whatever, and those are the days when symphony players would job, because the symphony wasn't a full-time job. So you get Chicago Symphony people. Chicago then had when I was in Iowa, the Chicago had a radio orchestra. WGN had an orchestra, and of course that folded up eventually. But they had some great players that used to come over and play. Their concertmaster, Fritz Siegel, actually became the concertmaster of the Pittsburgh Symphony once the Chicago orchestras folded. But he used to come over and play, and people in the Milwaukee Symphony and so forth used to come over and play in some of these community orchestras. In fact, in Philadelphia, when I played the opera, the other two oboes were in the orchestra, Minsker and
What a treat.
Theodore. Yeah, it was, especially Minsker. He was a great player. He was. I remember he once. I don't know, was Delancey or Minsker? Maybe it was Delancey was peeling a peach or something with his reed knife, to eat during my lesson. Tabuteau used to, and sometimes would fall asleep during the lesson. And but if you made a mistake, he would wake up and slam the wall or something, But you think he was sleeping, but no, he was. No, damn fool! Oh, one time there was a piece from Broad, I think that was kind of all syncopation. Da da dee dee da da dee dee dee. all the way through the piece, and I wasn't doing it right or something. And he wouldn't tell me I was doing wrong. He made me play over and over and over again. You know, just, he wouldn't help. He wouldn't say, just, "No, stupid." You know. I remember that. Lesson was terrible. But if you had a fairly decent lesson, like you'd say, "Oh, it's not too bad," you know.
That was as good as it got. That was his
Say,
praise.
"Wow, you know, I read what my folks. I had a great lesson today." You know, he'd count on one. Well, one time, because he gave lessons to anybody in service, so Grover Schultz was at Fort Dix in the band then, which is in New Jersey.
And he'd given it
And he
free
came-
if they were
yeah,
in uniform.
he came and took some lessons. Grover Schultz was the type who, any orchestra that was in town in Ann Arbor or something, he'd always take a lesson or meet the oboe players at home, stuff like that. And so he took some lessons, and he came for a lesson once. And, oh, hi, you know, because I knew him from Ann Arbor. Because when he was in the University Orchestra, he was the only oboe student at the university, and so I got to play second in the University Orchestra. And anyhow, of course, Tabuteau always tried to put down people when they first came. And he says, well, he said to me when I started playing after he played for a while, he says, "No, you're bad, but you're better than him."
What a way to praise.
And one time we were having woodwind class, and in the Boston Symphony wooden section decided to sit up in the balcony in here because Tableau was going to retire and leave, you know, and they wanted to see the great maestro, you know, last time. And so here are all these woodwind players in the Boston Symphony sitting up there, and he just made our lives miserable. He just bawled anything you played. Terrible, you know, just to kind of show off that he was still the taskmaster or mean or something. So when Delancey came, he seemed so nice in a way because he actually fixed my reed. He didn't tell me what he did, and he turned his back when he did it, but he actually fixed my reed and made it better, and he actually made a few compliments. It's kind of nice.
Did you ever have a teacher that said, "Oh, make you read this way," or gave you actual techniques, or was it just you sink or swim? Throw you in the deep end and...
Well, basic, you know, how to wind and scrape from my dad and so forth. But,
So he
and
would
I
tell
kind
you
of
things.
learned, I decided I was going to, he made my reeds for me mostly. I could try to make reeds, but hey, Dad, could you So I didn't really decide, start making my reeds exclusively for myself at music camp with John Mack. I decided I was going to learn how to make reeds for myself that summer, and I spent a lot. When the kids would have a afternoon off to go to the movies in town, I would stay in my cabin and make reeds and stuff like that. It was.
I think I had one of those moments when I was studying with you. I came in and I got stuff and I said, "I want to learn how to make reeds." I think you rolled your eyes. Okay.
I was never very successful at teaching it. But another thing was vibrato. I could never. I didn't think I had hardly any in myself, and then I played some new piece here when I first came. It was for chorus, and all the accompaniment was just harp. They had a harpist from someplace else, Interlochen, I guess, yeah, and then oboe. So I got to play with the local choral group, you know. This piece, which was a new piece, I had a lot of oboe in it, and I had a recording of it, and actually I heard this vibrato, and I said, I didn't know I had that.
Must have picked it up somewhere. Well, your dad used vibrato, right?
Yeah.
So he was a great influence in your life.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's, he was a taskmaster, and, you know, I mean, I had a...
Did he yell at you like Tabuteau did?
No, but he didn't yell, you know, it was no picnic taking a lesson. I thought I could stand Tabuteau because my dad sometimes would get mad, you know, but no, Tabuteau was...
A lot worse.
Now, Delancey could say cutting things, you know, and stuff like that. And like some conductors can be ranting and raving, and others can be cutting, you know.
Without
subtle.
yelling, and stick it to you that
There's
way.
all kinds of, I've noticed that at music camp with the kids, that they'd have all these different band conductors and orchestra conductors. Some would rant and rave and get results. Some would be very nice and so forth and get results. It was kind of interesting. It's hard to figure out what makes a successful teacher or a conductor, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've played under those tyrants before, and I just got sick of it in my life. I thought, how can, if someone is screaming obscenities at you about your playing, how will that make you make more beautiful music? And I just don't believe that's the most effective way to get there. I think, you find positive ways to say things and positive ways to suggest improvements. And certainly that's what we base our orchestra on, Ohio Valley Symphony, is that. It's sort of like positive reinforcement. We always tease our conductor, who will say things like, that last note of your solo was just lovely. Can you make the rest of it like that? But I mean, that's sort of the idea. So that's my orchestra that I've started was really a reaction to having gone through that with people like at Ohio State, Don McGinnis at Ohio State, who prides himself on being obnoxious and hateful, and Ravelli up in Michigan, same kind of thing.
It was kind of common in those days.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't say this on recording, but there was a teacher in my hometown in Minnesota. He was another World War I musician who they hired to teach brass. He had been in the Marine Corps in the World War I. And he was a very mean teacher, and yet he taught there all his whole career. And he used to yell at the students, say, "You're slower than the second coming of Christ." And can you imagine saying something like that to a student now? I mean...
Well, it's just not effective. Yeah.
But...
Not to mention offensive.
Yeah, but it's just, it's amazing what they used to...
Well, I kind of like to think it's because we have more women in the field now, and maybe that's helped make it a tad bit more genteel, you think?
Well,
or maybe that just things evolve.
I don't know. Like there was that period, Toscanini and Reiner and even Stokowski, when they had a guest rehearsal, he would walk around with the notebook, walk around the orchestra and make little notes. And they cleaned out the orchestra. You could fire people
At will, right?
Yeah. So.
Well, there's been some improvements made with contracts and to help with things like that. But, well, thank you so much for your time today, Ted. This has been great.
My pleasure.
And we're going to do a separate talk about reeds and have that as a separate thing. But we hope you come back and join us, and we hope this inspires you to get with your teacher and continue this next generation project. Thanks.
Thank you.